I love the idea that education is not dog food. Can we get the Mentimeter up, please? If you've been following and you've been throwing your thoughts into Mentimeter, I have the answers in front of me. If we could bring could we bring the list up? I mean, I can see the whole list in front of me. The top one is, how can we ensure that we've had voted up is, how can we ensure that change is not led by profiteers? There are a couple of questions about profit, so I'm amalgamating them. I'd love to ask all our panelists, we live in a capitalist society, profit dominates things, we may have a vision of the future that is optimistic. Can it succeed with the profit motive alongside it? Let's start, Gerd, with you.
Yeah, this is a big problem today. You know, we clearly have technology dominated by profiteers or by, by companies who seek a profit. In my view, there's nothing wrong with companies seeking profits and the system of business to monetize whatever you're doing. But it's a relative thing. It's not an absolute thing. Right? So I think we need to have rules, guidelines, regulations, social contracts, and generally sort of a way of switching our thinking from the old-fashioned way of saying whatever produces money is fine. Then we end up with Aramco, the Saudi Arabian oil company, or Meta, which is in a very similar business, data mining as opposed to oil mining. But then we end up with companies who do very well, doing very bad things. And so I think this is a process that we're going to see come to a head now in 2024, 25, as we look at geopolitics. There, I would say it will get worse before it gets better.
Okay.
And I think we're heading to a point where there is a clear confrontation between the profiteering and the sort of humanity thinking. Right? Right. And it's coming to a head. And I think that's actually a good thing, because in many ways, I would say we are currently as we were in 1968, when I was 7. In 1968, we had a huge switch of paradigm in the world, that everything became different after that. And now we're in 24, same thing, right? So humans change because of pain and love. And right now, it's a painful moment. But the change is coming. I think the change away from this sort of extreme capitalism is in the wings.
So you predict a summer of love for technology, yeah?
25.
25, okay, you heard it here first, folks. Timandra, summer of love?
A summer of love for technology, maybe so. I mean, I think the profit question is interesting, because when I talk about the kind of uber personalization, in fact, they talk about hyper personalization, people will often come back and say, but it is that way because companies can make a profit out of making us keep coming back, this very engaging social media world where we want to see ourselves reflected in our smartphones, but with likes and clicks and engagement. And so it's kind of inescapable because of that. But I think that's the wrong way around. I think the companies operate on that model because we keep going back. And we keep going back because our insecurities mean we want to be reflected in the Hall of Mirrors. Right. And so it needs a change from us. If we want to change the model, it's not about, oh, well, the companies are always going to do that because it's profitable. I think if we change our behavior and say, actually, you know, we value getting the same news as everybody else, maybe, or the same, we value a model of education where it's not only about you tailor content to me, but I also want this sense of I'm part of a lot wider community.
So a bit like the students in Paris in 1968.
Yes, we should take to the streets and demand less personalization. That would work. For sure.
Payal, can we live with the profit motive? Is that going to prevent us getting the value from technology?
I think, you know, when we say profit, we keep talking about companies. Yeah. I want to flip it and talk about young people in the global south. Mind you, they're 90% of the world's population. And they're very optimistic because guess what? Because of AI, they are profiting because many of their governments are failing them. So they are leading the creator economies and doing hyper-personalization and are really so for instance, numerous stories that I cover in my book about an educator who gets laid off during COVID. He makes a living on Pornhub because he knows people are on that platform, and he's teaching mathematics, and he has millions of views, right? That is entrepreneurship. That is profiting from patterns. That's profiting from cultural moments. And there are numerous such stories where these are young people who are really desperate to not be, a farmer or a cook or anything that the parents or the grandparents did. And they are doing a lot and profiting from these AI tools, which explains why majority of them are so much more optimistic about the future. So when we speak about profit, let's not just think in terms of the companies. Let's think about the everyday entrepreneurs that we don't really imagine and think about, because these tools are transforming their lives in ways that we cannot even fathom and imagine as we capture these stories again and again. Where are they inhabiting their, activities, selling pickles in Kerala to a diaspora, very much the hyper-personalization, we captured so many of these stories. In Kenya, a plumber was giving fintech tips on Instagram, right? And so all these examples come down to, let's start asking, when we say profit for whom, for what purpose, and can we get behind it if it means well-being for the majority world.
That's brilliant. So everybody's agreed it's in our hands, one way or the other. I often use the example of a teenage boy who's 18, working in Bangalore as a soccer data analyst for a football club in the UK. And it's possible for him to do that because of remote connectivity, of data, because he's smart. He doesn't have a newspaper around. He's a soccer analyst. He's a soccer analyst for Dundee United, though, and they were unfortunately relegated, so I'm not sure how good his analysis was. But nonetheless, the work can be done. Perhaps it's up to us to choose what we do, our behavior. I like it. There's a question about the representation of women in images and so on. You had lots of representation of images, and you talked about how that was important. Let's just see across the panel, what is it that we need to do to make sure that we have representation that is accurate, as you said in your talk, Payal?
Yeah, so this, actually that was one of the fundamental themes we came up with, women at work, for example. So when you're trying to change the algorithm, it's very deeply gendered, and we know that. I mean, it's very well established. The question is, how do women want to be represented? How do they want to be seen? And we have to see them in intersectional identity respects, right? Because a woman in rural India, for example, she has a particular sense of self that, say, an urban woman has, which is very different, right? So she doesn't mind being photographed. If you're in rural India, so we went to Rajasthan to click a lot of these, like in a rural area, and women want to be shown at home because that's also where their work is. So their work, their professional and personal life comes together in their domestic sphere because they're loom makers. So their loom is literally in the center of their home, right? Yeah. So then when you're talking about labeling of this content, are you saying this is a workplace, right? And that creates diversity of data. So we were creating prompts of workplace, work tools, and we were getting them to tell us how would they like it to be labeled, which is how you change the game. Get them involved in prompting, labeling, and also telling us what not to also represent. Yeah. And that really is a pathway to.
So the key to diversity is in listening to the people in the first place.
Absolutely.
Timandra?
Well, I mean, I think it's a very good example of the phenomenon that data and AI can only work with the data that is available, which is from the past. And when the past has been unfair, then the data reflects that. And then we look at it and go, well, that's unfair. Like, well, in some cases, that's because the reality has been unfair. So maybe it's telling us something we need to know. Not in every case. I mean, I think this is the other thing is that the data is not reflective of the whole of reality, and that's something easy to forget. I think we tend to think that everything is there now, everything's on the internet, but of course it's not. It's what is there is very selective. But one positive thing I think about this is that it kind of forces us to think about fairness and what fairness looks like and what unfairness looks like. And what would a fair society look like? But then, okay, how do we get there for the actual society rather than just tweaking the internet so the internet looks like the world is fair without actually changing the reality?
So let's change the reality. Gerd, but your androids, were they male? Were they female? It seemed that they were all men as far as the perception goes.
Yeah. Well, I spent about 2 hours on the internet looking for quotes from women about AI. And I only found Mira from OpenAI, the CTO of OpenAI.
Yeah.
But it was very hard to find a piece that fit, right?
Right.
So the reality is, in AI, it's mostly white old guys, right? And I would say if there were more women in AI, we probably would have less issues with making it human. The reason that is I think it's quite clear that AI right now is about power and money.
Right.
And this is what men do.
And as Timandra says, this is reflecting the current reality.
Yeah. I think that will change dramatically, but right now it's very much like this. I mean, even if you go to stock footage sites, right, and you look for the AI robot, it's either going to be a sort of powerful-looking man or a sex robot, you know?
Yeah.
It's one of those two, and the sex robot, of course, is a woman, right?
Yeah.
So it's bizarre. This is the way it is. I mean, if you advertise for a data scientist on LinkedIn, was for a long time, LinkedIn wouldn't show you any women applying for this job because data scientists are men. It wouldn't show the ad to a woman automatically, right? Because they're disqualified because you're a woman to even see the ad, right? I mean, this is the reality that we're facing. And, you know, I run an organization of futurists, and I tell you, it's very hard to find women that will do similar things and currently the guys are doing, and we have to make an active effort. So I'm really for making that effort, making it 50-50 as much as we can. I hire only women, for example, for all of my work. You know, they're just better. Hey, anyway, it's not an easy topic. Right?
Thank you for facing up and answering that question. Really appreciate it. We've got like 5 minutes left. I want to ask the panel, get ready panel, and in a minute I'm going to ask you for a really punchy sentence, just one sentence. What should everybody do to get the best out of the conference, given what you've been thinking about, all right? I'm going to ask you that in a second. Before that, going to ask you the question we've got here. Train versus teach is a great paradigm. It's a great way of thinking about things. But the people who control technology don't want us to be able to augment, change the algorithms and alter them. So how can we do that effectively? It was something you were talking about, Payal. So can you kick off with this one, and then we'll come back across. So how can we actually do what you were talking about?
I think one is that we need to get a little humble if you have power, and if you don't have power, you need to understand you have far more power than you do. So it's two different logics, and together, only together, we can make this happen. So, yeah.
Work together, and it comes down to our choice and our agency to do things.
Absolutely, because, you know, for example, there are powers in number. There's, you know, the global south, there's this huge thing is, oh my God, is Africa going to be a lost continent again? Absolutely not. In fact, there's a leapfrogging because now you don't need to code to have, you know, to have control over and build apps. So you see this massive infusion of for Africa, by Africa, applications, digital ecosystems, and the momentum is so contagious. If anyone has gone there, you will feel it. You go to India, you will feel that they see a future and they are going to really embrace it. And while we are, you know, I think the bottom line is that pessimism is a sort of privilege for those who can afford to despair. The rest have no choice but to move forward, because our future depends on it.
Thank you for giving the big shout out to optimism and also to Africa. Right, let's get to that. I'm going to go straight to this final question. It's only 2,000 people, so no pressure. You're deciding their future for the next 2 days. What advice do you give to them to get the best out of the conference from your perspective of everything you've done, the researching, the writing and everything? Let's go in the order we spoke. So we're going to go Gerd, Payal, and finish with Timandra. Gerd, begin with.
Well, my single advice would be get off the phone, and talk to people, disconnect from everything else, talk to people, communicate, learn.
Get real, communicate, learn, and listen. Listen is the tough one, isn't it, apparently? That's what my wife tells me anyway. Payal, what should we do to get the best out of the next 2 days?
I challenge you to get into a really uncomfortable conversation. Ooh. Try not to be agreeable. And, in good faith, and now that you know that you've been mandated to do that, you can do it in a way which is not personal. But honestly, we really need these conversations because typically when we go to these conferences, we are like, yeah, sure, that's amazing. We're amazing. Everything's amazing. No, can we get past that and say, hey, I don't get this, right? Can you explain this one? It doesn't make sense. I'm just trying to process that.
Just to be clear, it's also okay to say something is amazing.
Of course, but look, we're all here. We're all on the same page in many ways. We want to network. The question is, can we get uncomfortable and build from that discomfort in ways which we all can benefit? That's all. In good faith, though, of course.
Let's disconnect. Let's have great comfort conversations. Love it. No pressure, Timandra.
Well, also, I agree with all these things. I think this is great advice. So all I would add would be try and hang on to a sense of what it is you're trying to do in terms of your wider mission, like what is it you're trying to do in learning or education, but then be really open to what are the different ways that might help you get there, and what are the new technologies there that might help you get there in unexpected ways. So I guess try and make a map of the whole territory and be open to going off to some side roads, but keep the whole map in your mind.
I love that. Have a map in your mind, disconnect, have conversations, be prepared to be uncomfortable, and you have license to be uncomfortable and to make other people uncomfortable as well, because she said so. There we go. All right. And I would say, above all, let's do it with humanity in this liminal space. We do need the hard work, and let's do it together. So thank you to you for your contributions, and thanks to our panel for a great kickoff for the conference. All right.